Organizational development and change, Block 3, Forms of Organizational Change, Unit 12, Evaluation of Organizational Change. We will be covering the introduction part, approaches to evaluating change, purpose of context of evaluation, evaluation and action research approach, purpose of evaluation and strategies, the data gathering techniques, and the last part, data analysis and feedback. Effective evaluation and promotion of change needs a systematic collection of data that are analyzed and presented in an appropriate form. Without the subsequent evaluation, one cannot be certain of change interventions' effectiveness. This evaluation helps an organization to have a better understanding of the outcomes and the impact of a particular intervention. It also helps the feed forward cycle for further change initiatives. In most of the cases, the external consultants are involved in the change process and they leave the organization before seeing the effects of the planned interventions. So, managing change is not an easy process, and hence it is an essential to get to know about the success as well as the failure of an intervention, which will have the benefit of assisting to learn about the managing change. Now, to find out the effects of change interventions, systematic research should be undertaken. Any kind of systematic evaluation depends upon the data and employing rational analysis. So, one's belief and intuition does not support a scientific evaluation. Rather, we should be depending upon a right evaluation strategy. Therefore, the collection and analysis of data should be done in a systematic way, independent of one's own assumptions or guesswork. Purpose and context of the evaluation. Evaluation prior to carrying out any interventions present the current status of an organization. It explains about the organizational changes need to be brought out. Evaluation study, which is carried out subsequent to the intervention, assists to gauge the effectiveness of the introduced change. So, research based evaluation facilities examining the practical problems, anything associated with the initiated change and making decision about particular courses of action necessary for the intended changes to happen. So, evaluation carried out during the early stages of a change program is often more advantageous or more beneficial to improve or fine tune the change process and is referred to as formative evaluation. While evaluation carried out during the later or the end stages, either to assess the impact of the change or to determine the extent to which the goals set have been met with, or whether to still continue with the planned activities, it is otherwise known as summative evaluation. So, applied research can take place at any of these levels. Now, evaluation and action research approach. Evaluation research is mainly concerned with testing of the effectiveness of an action or activity with the data gathered and as well as analyzed on the basis of what is happening or has happened, that is to monitor. And the finding based upon the analysis of these data are then subsequently disseminated back to the sponsor. A wide range of strategies, including experimentation, survey, and a longitudinal studies, and a variety of techniques such as your interview, questionnaire, and observation, etc., may be employed or taken up or can be taken there, help to find out the strategies and how these evaluation can be taken up. Now, Lewin first used the term action research in the year 1946. Action research makes use of the same strategies and data collection techniques that are used by evaluation research. Action research, which actually differs from other form of applied research such as evaluation research due to an explicit focus upon the action and in particular promoting of change within any organization, that is within an organization internal. In addition, the person undertaking research is involved in the action for change and subsequently the application of knowledge thus gained elsewhere. When we are talking about evaluation research, it commences with a very clear understanding by the person undertaking the evaluation of action or any activity that is to be evaluated. So it includes the finding out employees' opinion towards their line manager style and skills, the senior management's commitment to the changes, the communication process inside the organization, the future direction of the organization and employees' commitment to the organization. Data collection process is actually done by applying a variety of techniques like questionnaires or interviews, etc. The final data is analyzed and the findings reported to the organization. Based on the examination of the evaluation report, any kind of further change interventions are made by the top or the senior management to address to the issues arising out of the examination. Now, this diagrammatic representation of how an initial action or a change intervention leads to determine the objectives which is related to the criteria for the original change intervention. Then how it will be leading to collection of data. Then once the data are collected, it has to be analyzed. Then once the analysis is done, the finding or the results has to be disseminated or given to the appropriate person. After that, suggestions or suggest action to fulfill the aim of the original change intervention. So this diagrammatic representation of evaluation research speaks about how the action is being initiated or the change intervention is started with the determination of objectives related to the criteria for the original change intervention. Then how important it is to collect the data, and after collecting the data one has to analyze those data. Then after analysis the result or the findings has to be disseminated to the or given to the right person so that suggestions or suggest action to fulfill aims of the original change intervention. Now, action research is the term where the promotion of change is explicit within the action research process. This action research process commences with an initial idea for a change which is expressed as an objective. So idea will be there for a change. which will be expressed in terms in objective. That means fact finding and analysis is carried out about the intended change to generate an overall plan and decision about the first steps to be taken. The remainder of the first cycles involve revising the change interventions to ensure that it meets the needs of the organization using information gathered through monitoring and evaluation process. Further planned action steps are amended or changed and implemented to take account of unforeseen changes. Their effects are again monitored and evaluated, and further amendments or changes are made. Now, the strength of action research rests upon like having a focus upon the change. That means what kind of change you want to have, you need to have a right focus on that. Then the recognition that time needs to be devoted to reconnaissance or monitoring and evaluation. Next, the involvement of employees, that is practitioners, throughout the process. That means because employees will be practicing those things, they need to be involved. So CN in 1995 emphasizes the importance of the employee involvement throughout the process so that they own up the change process. That means they take the responsibility of the change process. So once employees have identified a need for change and widely shared this need, it like this becomes practically difficult to ignore, and the pressure for the change comes from within the organization. So action research therefore combines both information gathering and facilitation of change. Now, this diagrammatic representation of action research spiral, where it starts with evaluating, that means initial idea and criteria for change, then monitoring, then implementing, action present, then reconnaissance, that is fact finding and analysis, and this chain goes to revise the change interventions as necessary, amend planned action steps, implement planned action steps, then we have to monitor implementation and effects, and then we have to evaluate. Next steps goes to revising the change interventions as and when necessary, then amending plans, action steps, implementing the planned action steps, monitoring implementation and effects, and again evaluation. So this is the strategy how the action research plan of spiral goes on. So the purpose of evaluation and strategy. First one is clarity of the purpose. That means it has to be very much clear. So the most difficult aspect of any evaluation is that what is being evaluated and why. In other words, the precise purpose and objectives. So it is essential to ensure that both the person undertaking the evaluation and the sponsor have the same understanding. Another and equally important aspect of this of ensuring clarity of purpose relates to the understanding and insight the person undertaking the evaluation brings to the context of the change. Now, strategies. Once a clear purpose for evaluation has been established, a range of strategies may be adopted. Those are divided into, first one is survey, second is your case study, experimental, longitudinal, and last one is cross-sectional. So these strategies should not be thought of as mutually exclusive. For example, a case study of an organization may well involve collecting of data through using a survey or a questionnaire. Similarly, an experimental strategy such as testing the relative impact has to be taken up. So, the survey strategy, when we are talking about the survey strategy is the most popular strategy for obtaining data to evaluate change. Using this strategy, a large amount of data can be collected from a sizable population in an economic way. That means in a very cost effective way. The strategy is often based around a questionnaire. Questionnaire enables standardized data to be collected, thereby allowing easy comparison. Because when we are having the grounds like you need to rate in the scale of 1 to 5, it will be easy to compare all the data. If we make it very much open ended, then comparisons cannot be made. So they also are again relatively easy to understand and perceive as authoritative by most people. However, the questionnaire is not only the data collection technique that can be used within a survey strategy, structured observations and so survey questions can be asked to both individuals and groups. Where groups are interviewed, their selections will need to be conducted very carefully. So it is appropriate to take a sample of horizontal hierarchy through the organization to select each group. So as a result, each member of an interview group is likely to have a similar status. In contrast, a group comprising of vertical hierarchy would be influenced by the status differences. Now, case study strategy. Robson in 1993 defines case study as the development of detailed, intensive knowledge about a single case or a small number of. Typically, an experimental strategy which involves like definition of a clear hypothesis, selection of samples from known populations, allocation of these samples to different groups of experimental conditions, introduction of a planned change to one or more of the sample groups, control of as many other factors as possible, comparison between the groups. Longitudinal and cross-sectional strategies. The final two strategies, that is the longitudinal and cross-sectional, offer two mutually exclusive time perspective for the other strategies. The main strength of the longitudinal perspective is the ability it offers to evaluate change over a period. So, by gathering data about people or events over a time, it may be understood the impact of change. So, in contrast, a cross sectional perspective describes the incidence of a particular phenomenon, such as the information technology skills possessed by the manager in an or maybe in one organization at one particular time. So the data gathering techniques, which actually the employed need to become consistent with the purpose of the evaluation. So these data gathering techniques are mainly used because of the need to be consistent with the purpose of the evaluation. For all change evaluation, it is quite important that data appear credible and faithfully represents the situation. So data can be gathered into two ways. First one is secondary data and the second one is primary data. Secondary data, like when considering data for evaluating the change, most people automatically think in terms of collecting new, that is primary data only. However, the secondary data can provide a useful insight to begin to evaluate or change interventions. This secondary data include both raw data and published summaries this that could be collected within the organization or externally. Most organizations computerized personal information system. Although data have been collected for a specific purpose, they can also be used for other purpose. So data collected as part of the performance and development appraisal might be combined with the data on sources include your quality daily newspapers, government department surveys, and publish official statistics covering social, demographic, and economic topics. Where limited appropriate secondary data are available, primary data will need to be collected specifically for the purpose. So primary data, first one is observation method. So where change is people related, such as how they respond to a particular training intervention, the best way to collect the data is to watch them while implementing their learning. This process involves the systematic observation, recording, description, analysis, and interpretation of people's behavior. There are two main types of observation here. The participants' observation is qualitative, wherein the researchers attempt to become fully involved in the lives and activities of those being researched and share their experiences not only by observing but by feeling those experiences. So by contrast, structured observations is quantitative and it, as its name suggests, has a high level of predetermined structure. So it is considered with the frequency of action such as time and motion studies and tends to be more concerned with fact findings. It is essential to note that observation method or no such method alone fulfill the requirements. Therefore, a combination method should be used or employed. For example, it is necessary to supplement observation with the other methods of data collection such as interview and questionnaires to validate the findings. Now, this data gathering techniques, like what are the data types like? As we have discussed, the secondary and primary. Under the secondary, it is internal and external. Under external, again, it is whether it is summary or raw. Under the primary technique, first is your observation methods, interview. Under interview, it may be depth and unstructured interview or as semi-structured interview. Again, under the questionnaire, it may be structured questionnaire or a standardized questionnaire. So these are the main topics in a bird eye view. You can have a look and get a clear understanding how data types are being divided. Like one will be secondary, another will be the primary. The main two division of data types are primary and secondary. Again, under the secondary, it may be internal or external. And under primary, it may be through observations, or that is through direct observations, through direct interviews, and through using a questionnaire. Again, under observation, it will be like participants observation or a structured observation. Under the interview, it may be in-depth or unstructured interview, or else it may be semi-structured interview. And under the questionnaire, it is the structured in a questionnaire or an unstructured, or sorry, or a standardized questionnaire. So interview method have been described as a conversation, that's a discussion between the interviewer and the respondent with the purpose of eliciting certain information. That means you need to get some information from the participants who are being interviewed. So these interviews could be classified as less structured, highly structured, and semi-structured. So when you are conducting an interview and discussing with the interviewee, then the interview could be less structured, or could be highly structured, or could be semi-structured. Now, the unstructured interviews are used to explore the change situation in depth and are often referred to as an in-depth interviews. There is no predetermined list of questions, although the person undertaking the interview needs to have a clear idea of those aspects of the change. So these are often noted down prior to the interview checklist. So interviewees are encouraged to talk freely about the interview. In semi-structured interview, the interviewer will have a list of themes and questions to be covered. As these interviews questions may vary from interview to interview to reflect those areas most appropriate to respondents' knowledge and understanding. So it means some questions may be inappropriate or not right in a particular interviews. Additional questions may also be required in some semi-structured interviews to enable the objectives to be explored comprehensively. The nature of the questions and ensuring discussion mean that data from the semi-structured interviews are usually recorded by taking notes. However, as it could happen with the in-depth interview, tape recording may be used to provide it is acceptable to the interviewee. Now, questionnaire method, structured interviews can be viewed as a form of questionnaire. So, in both structured interview and questionnaire method, the respondent is asked to respond to the same set of questions in a predetermined order. The questionnaires are one of the most widely used data collection techniques, and each respondent is asked to respond to the same set of questions. A questionnaire provides an effective method of gathering data from a large sample prior to analysis. So, responses to questionnaire could be recorded easily as they are based on the predetermined and standardized set of questions. In structured interviews, there is face-to-face contact, as the interviewer reads out each question from an interview schedule and records the response usually on the same schedule. That means the questions will be read aloud and it will be on be quite easy. So answers are often pre-coded in the same way as those for the questionnaires. There is limited social interaction between the interviewer and the respondent, such as when explanations are provided and the questions need to be read out in the same tone of voice so as not to indicate any kind of biasness. Data analysis and feedback. Analysis and feedback are important in both evaluation and research and action research. Evaluation research ends usually with the presentation of findings from the analysis. Once the findings have been done finally, so the evaluation research ends there. In contrast, a researcher involved in an action research project perhaps has a process. A consultant is likely to be involved in developing actions and revising the change interventions as and when necessary. Analysis of data is obviously a precursor to feedback. Analysis evaluate the change against the agreed objectives. Analysis of large amounts of data, whether quantitative or qualitative, will involve inevitably the use of a computer, and those undertaking analysis should be familiar with the computer software. If objectives, strategies, and techniques of data collection and analysis are better integrated, the data could have been analyzed more effectively. Feedback. Findings derived through the systematic data analysis are fed back to the sponsor, usually in form of a report or a presentation. While reporting the critical findings, it is quite important that the findings are feedbacks without being filtered, even if it is not, or even if it is offending a few. This could immensely benefit the organization in terms of having a open feedback system. In case of a large organization, whether large group, maybe whether the large groups are involved, a summary of the feedback is cascaded from the top to the down in any organization. This may make use of existing communication structures such as newsletters, notice board, and team structures. Alternatively, if rapid feedback is often, we can take like if the rapid feedback is required, additional newsletters and team briefings might be used. At first, the research sponsor reviews the full report of the findings. Subsequently, that means during the course of time, a summary may be provided for the curriculum to circulation to all the employees. As part of the team briefing process, each managerial level within the hierarchy is likely to see its own data and is obliged to feed the findings down to the subordinate. So SAIN in 1990 and 95 argues that such a top-down approach may be problematic in managing change as it reinforces dependency on the organizational hierarchy to address issues identified. If some issues raised by the evaluations are by chance ignored, then employees' morale may go down. So, in bottom up feedback, data are shared initially with each work group who generated them. This process concentrates upon the understanding the data and clarifying any concerns. However, a top bottom approach to disseminating findings can enable relatively rapid communication. So by contrast, a bottom up approach involves employee thinking about issues, deciding and taking responsibility for the action they will take and selecting those issues they need to feed back to their line managers. So it is inevitably more time consuming, but will only work where an organization's culture allows the employees to be empowered by the managers to take ownership of the changes. The approach to feedback, like the rest of the evaluation process, needs to be tailored to the precise requirements of the organization and a particular change interventions or stage within a change process. So when we will be going through the slides again, like when we started with the approaches to the evaluating change, how to find the effects of change intervention in a systematic research should be undertaken. Then we started with the purpose and context. Purpose was evaluation prior to carrying out any intervention presents in current status of an organization, how it explains about the organizational changes need to be brought out. Evaluation study carried out subsequent to the interventions assess to gauge the effectiveness of the introduced change. Research based evaluation facilities examining practical problems associated with the initiated change and making decision about a particular courses of action necessary for the intended change to happen. So evaluation carried out during the early stages of a change program is often beneficial to improve and fine tune the change process, and this one is referred to as formative evaluation. And when we are talking about summative evaluation, this evaluation, while evaluation when it is carried out during the later or the end stages, either to assess the impact of change or determine the extent to which the set goals have been met with or with still to continue with the planned change activities, it is termed as summative evaluation. So when you are applying, the applied research can take place at any of these levels. Then when we were talking about the evaluation research is concerned with testing of the effectiveness of an action or activity with data gathered and analyzed on the basis of what is happening or has happened. That means we need to monitor it constantly. So finding based upon the analysis of this data are subsequently disseminated back to the sponsorer. So a wide range of strategies including the experimentation, survey and longitudinal studies and a variety of techniques such as interview, questionnaire and observation may be employed or used to do this. So this action research was first used by Lewin in 1946, and action research make use of the same strategies and data collection technique that are used by the evaluation research. So action research differs from from other forms like of applied research such as evaluation research due to an explicit focus on the action and in particular promoting of change within an organization. So in addition, the person undertaking research is involved in action for a change and subsequently the application of knowledge is thus gained. Now, evaluation research, when it commences with a clear understanding by the person undertaking evaluation research of action or activity, is that it is to be evaluated. So, it also includes finding out employees' opinion towards their line manager's style and skills, the senior management's commitment to the changes, communication process, and the future direction of the organization and employees' commitment to the organization. So, the data collection process is done by applying a variety of techniques like questionnaires and interviews. The final data is analyzed and the findings reported to the organization. Now, based on the examination of the evaluation report, further change interventions are made by the top or the senior management to address issues arising out of the examination. Now, this picture clearly depicts how initial action or change interventions are being taken up. Then one has to determine the objectives related to the criteria for the original change intervention. Then one has to collect the data. Collect the data is highly essential. And after collecting the data, one has to analyze those data. Once this analysis is completed, we need to find out what are the results of this analysis, and this has to be disseminated to the persons who are in charge of that. So that disseminate findings are to be given to the concerned and appropriate authority so that they can suggest action to fulfill the aims of the original change interventions. Now, action research focuses the promotion of change is explicit within action research process. This action research process commences with an initial idea for a change which expressed as an objective. So fact finding and analysis is carried out about the intended change to generate an overall plan and decision about these first steps to be taken. Now, the remainder of the first cycle also involves revising the change interventions to ensure that it meets the need of the organization using the information gathered through monitoring and the evaluation process. Further, the planned action steps are amended or changed and implemented to take account of unforeseen changes. So their effects are monitored as well as evaluated, and further amendments are also made. Now, what was the strength of the action research? Which rests upon like having a focus on the change. Then the recognition that time needs to be devoted to reconsonance, monitoring and evaluation. Then the involvement of employees or the practitioner throughout the process is highly essential. So CN in 1995, he has emphasized on the importance of employees' involvement through the process so that they own up the change process. Once these employees have identified a need to change and has widely shared this need, it becomes difficult to ignore, and the pressure of the change becomes or comes from within the organization. So action research therefore combines both the information gathering and facilitation of the change. Now this diagrammatic representation of action research spiral, which starts with how evaluation takes place, like monitor the implementation and effects to initial ideas, then fact finding and analysis, plan action step for the interventions, then it leads to revised change interventions as necessary, with amend plan steps, action steps, implementing planned action steps, monitoring and implementing the effects, and then to evaluate, which leads to revise change in interventions as and when necessary. Then again, amend plan action steps, implement plan and action steps, monitor the implementation and the effects, and at last to evaluate. So the purpose of evaluation and strategies is, first one is clarity of purpose. The most difficult aspect of any evaluation is what is being evaluated and why. In other words, the precise purpose and objectives. So it is essential to ensure that both the person undertaking the evaluation and the sponsor have the same kind of understanding. Another and equally important aspects of ensuring clarity of purpose relates to the understanding and insight the person undertaking the evaluation brings to the context of the change. Now, strategies, once a clear purpose for evaluation has been established, a range of strategies may be adopted. So these are divided into 5 categories like the survey, case study, experimental, longitudinal, and the cross section. So these strategies should not be thought of as mutually exclusive, because we can take an example, like if we are using a case study, then the organization may as well involve the collection of data using a survey. And similarly, in an experimental strategy such as testing the relative impact, other methods can equally be involved and only one method cannot be employed. So survey strategy speaks about that it is the most popular strategy for obtaining data to evaluate any kind of change. Using this strategy, a large amount of data can be collected from a sizable population in an economic way. That is a cost-effective way. So the strategy is often based around a questionnaire, and this questionnaire enables standardized data to be collected, thereby allowing easy comparison. So they are also relatively easy to be understood and perceived as authoritative by most people. However, the questionnaire is not only the data collection technique that can be used within a survey strategy. Structured observations and structured interviews with standardized questions can also be employed. So survey questions can be asked to both the individuals and groups. Where groups are interviewed, their selections will need to be conducted carefully. It is quite appropriate to take example of the horizontal hierarchy through the organizations to select each group. As a result, each member of an interview group is likely to have a similar status. In contrast, a group comprising of a vertical hierarchy would be influenced by the status differences. Case study strategy, which Robson in 1993 defines it as the development of detailed intensive knowledge about a single case or a small number of related cases. So this strategy is undertaken to conduct a research on change management within an organization or part of an organization. So data collection techniques of a case study includes interviews, observation, analysis of the existing documents. Experiment strategy, typically an experiment strategy which involves like definition of a clear hypothesis, your selection of samples from known populations, allocation of these samples to different groups of experimental conditions, introduction of planned change to one or more of the sample groups, control of as many other factors as possible, comparison between the groups. So longitudinal and cross-sectional strategies, the two final strategies, the longitudinal and the cross-sectional, offers two mutually exclusive time perspective for the other strategies. Like the main strength of the longitudinal perspective is the ability to offer to evaluate change over a period. By gathering data about people or events over a time, it may be understood the impact of change. In contrast, in a cross-sectional perspective describes the incidence of a particular phenomenon such as the information technology skills possessed by manager in one organization at one particular time. Data gathering techniques, the gathering techniques employed need to be consistent with the purpose of evaluation. For all change evaluations, it is important that data appear credible and faithfully represents the situation. Data can be gathered in two ways, that is secondary data as well as the primary data. When we are talking about secondary data, we are considering the data for evaluating change. Most people automatically think in terms of collecting new, that is primary data only. However, this secondary data can provide a useful insight to the beginning to evaluate a chain intervention. This secondary data include both raw as well as published summarizes that could be collected within the organization or through externally. So most organizations collect and store a variety of data to support their operations such as the payroll, data details, copies of letters, minutes of the meetings and accounts of sales of goods or services. So increasingly these data are stored in electronic form and in case of human resource data often as part of a computerized personal information system. Although data have been collected for a specific purpose, they can also be used for other purpose. Data collected as part of performance and development appraisal might be combined with data on competencies for career management or succession planning. So external sources of the secondary data tend to provide summarized rather than raw data. So sources include both quality daily newspapers, government department surveys, and published official statistics covering social, demographic, and economic topics. Where limited appropriate secondary data are available, primary data will need to be collected specifically for the purpose which has to be done. So primary data can be like through the observation method, that is where a change is people related, such as how they respond to a particular training interventions. The best way to collect the data is to watch them while implementing their learning. So this process involves the systematic observations like recording the descriptions, analysis and interpretation of the people's behavior. So there are mainly two main types of observation. The participant observation is qualitative, wherein the researchers attempt to become fully involved in the lives and activities of those being researched and shares their experience not only by observing but by feeling those experiences. By contrast, the structured observation is quantitative and it, as the name suggests, has a high level of predetermined structure. It is concerned with the frequency of actions such as time and motion studies and tends to be concerned with the fact finding. It is essential to note that observation method or no such method alone could actually fulfill the requirements. Therefore, a combination method should be used. For example, it is necessary to supplement observation with other methods of data collection such as interviews and questionnaires to validate the findings. Now, this data gathering technique, like the data type, is being divided into secondary and primary. Under this secondary, we can see the internal and the external part, where we are getting the, from internal, there are again divided into as raw and summary. External are a similar way, again divided into raw and summary related data. Then when we are talking about the primary data, it is through the observation method, through the interview method, and through the questionnaire method. So when we are talking about observation, it is through the participant. Again, it can be through the structured form of observation. And under the interview, it may be in-depth interview or unstructured interview. Then under the interview, again, we can have semi-structured interviews. And questionnaires again can be structured or they can be of standardized. So this interview method have been described as a conversation between the interviewer and the respondent with the purpose of getting some information related to the questions which is asked by the interviews. So these interviews need to be again classified as less structured or highly structured or semi-structured. When we are talking about an unstructured interviews, these are used to explore the change situation in depth and are often referred to as in-depth interviews. So there is no predetermined list of like questions, although the person undertaking the interview need to have a clear idea on those aspects of the change. So there are, or these are often noted down prior to their interview as a checklist. So these in this the interviews are usually encouraged to talk freely about the events or the behavior or any kind of beliefs they are having in relation to the changes, and it is their perception which guide the interview. But when we are talking about the semi-structured interview, the interviewer will have a list of themes and questions to be covered. They will be having a structured one, semi-structured. Some themes will be there, some questions will be there. As these interviews and questions may vary from interview to interview. And the nature of the questions, the ensuring that the discussion means that the data from the semi-structured interviews are usually recorded by taking some kind of notes. So it could happen that in-depth interviews, some tape recording may be used as it is provided and it is acceptable by the interviewee. So the questionnaire method, it is again structured interviews can be viewed in form of questionnaire. Both structured interview and questionnaire methods, respondent is asked to respond to same set of questions in a predetermined order. So the analysis part, the data analysis and feedback are equally important in both evaluation and research and action research. Evaluation research end usually with the presentation of findings from the analysis. So in contrast, a researcher involved in an action research project, perhaps as a process consultant, is likely to be involved and is also in developing actions and revising the changes of interventions as and when it is necessary. So we have completed it. Thank you so much.